Okay, so it's my pleasure today to introduce the seminar by Pauline Zarouk. Pauline and I have worked together in the past on the EBOS survey and are doing so now on DESI. She completed a PhD in Saclay in 2018. She's been a postdoc in Durham since then, and as well up until October 2020, when she became a staff researcher back in Paris, but at a different university, at the Jussieu University. She's done a lot of great work, both on EBOS and DESI, and I think in particular we're going to hear about the DESI work today. All right, thanks, Pauline.
Thanks, Will, and thanks the organizers for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to give this seminar. So, as Will said, I'm going to present my work in DESI that I started. So, yeah, 2 years ago when I went to Durham for my postdoc, and so some of the work I'm going to present. Most of them actually includes, of course, collaborators from Durham University. So I'm going to present the DESI Bright Galaxy Survey from the target selection steps to the scientific analysis, or at least the analysis I'm interested in and we plan to do with this sample. Okay, so first, just to give some context, DESI is going to create a 3D maps of the large-scale structures of the universe, same as what previous galaxy surveys experiments did, such as EBOS. And the general context and motivations for doing this, of course, is to understand the full picture of the evolution and formation of our universe. And so DESI has been designed to understand more specifically dark energy, and to answer this question of the acceleration of the expansion of the universe that has been discovered and that basically is acting now in the universe as the major component. But we can also obtain informations on the role of dark matter, cold dark matter, and neutrinos on the structure formation, how these structures form from the initial density fluctuations that we can observe with the cosmic microwave background. And even more before in the history of the universe, we hope we are going to have some information about the physics that governs the very first moments of the universe, and that we call inflation. So you may all be familiar with the concordance model. So using different cosmological probes, so the cosmic microwave background using temperature and polarization, supernovae type 1a, baryon acoustic oscillations, they all converge towards same understanding of the energy content of the universe that is represented in this figure from the latest EBOS collaboration results, showing the amount of the dark energy and the amount of matter. And basically it gives us today's energy content of the universe with almost 70% of dark energy, which is the big unknown in this cosmological model, 25% of dark matter. And regarding dark energy, so in this standard model of cosmology, we assumed the acceleration of the expansion of the universe can be explained by just a constant, a cosmological constant that enters the equation of general relativity. So basically here we assume that the responsible for the acceleration of the expansion of the universe can be described as a fluid, whose equation of state, which is the ratio between its pressure and its density, is constant and negative. So something that is, of course, exotic. But if we adopt this approach, this dark energy approach, we could imagine, this is the simplest explanation for the acceleration of the expansion of the universe, but we could imagine fluid with time-dependent properties, for instance. So really, in the dark energy approach, when we assume an additional exotic component in today's energy content, we want to understand the properties of dark energy. And to do so, we are going to measure the evolution of distances across time as most precise as possible. But we can also have another approach, which is not assuming any cosmological constant or additional exotic component except dark matter. And in this approach, where we wonder whether general relativity, the theory of the gravitation, is still valid at cosmological scales. We know it has been tested, and it's still tested very precisely at solar system scales. But at cosmological scales, we assume it works, and basically we can measure one observable we can measure to test the theory of gravity is the rate at which structures grow by gravitational collapse, what we call the growth rate of structure. And to measure this, both the expansion of the universe and to test gravity with 3D maps of large-scale structures of the universe, we are going to do a clustering analysis, so a statistical analysis. As I said, so these structures were formed from the initial primordial fluctuation that were observed in with the cosmic microwave background, and these initial fluctuations evolve under gravitational collapse in an expanding universe to give the hierarchy of structures we can observe today on this map, where basically the observer is at the center. Each point corresponds to a galaxy with 2 angular coordinates and the redshift, so the distance along the line of sight. And we can measure the correlations, the spatial correlations between 2 regions, between 2 dense regions, and we are going to basically probe the clustering strength using statistical tool to have information about the density of the matter field. So we are going to, the simplest estimator is the 2-point clustering statistics. So, of course, this kind of analysis has been done in the past, and so Will mentioned SDSS, and I did my PhD with eBOS. So all these measurements were SDSS and some other were part of the stage 3, and basically just for SDSS we had about 2 million spectra. But now with DESI and with other experiments, we are entering an era of precision cosmology, statistical precision cosmology with much more data. So about 35 million spectra for DESI. So DESI is here. You also have PSF, Euclid, for instance. And and I'm in this talk, as I said, I'm going to focus on DESI, who has already started taking data. So I'm going to be quick on DESI. I'm pretty sure you know already about the instrument. So DESI is installed on the Mayol telescope at Kitt Peak. It's a 4-meter telescope. We have 6 lens optical correctors, 5,000 robotic positioners, and an optical fibers. Basically, we have 10 spectrographs with 3 arms. So in order to cover the optical range and also the near infrared. And with this instrument, whose commissioning is now finished, we are going to observe, oh, sorry, I forgot the pictures. We are going to obtain 35 million spectra, as I said, which are divided into different tracers. So basically, depending on the redshift range we want to probe, we optimize the number of objects we observe. And so at low redshift, we are going to observe this bright galaxy survey I'm going to detail in the next slide. So 10 million bright galaxies up to redshift 0.5, 4 million luminous red galaxies at redshift between 0.4 and 1, 17 million emission line galaxies. So this is the densest DESI sample at a redshift range where where eBOS started taking data, but we really need more data to understand better this redshift range. and at higher redshift, 2.5 million quasars. So quasars for clustering analysis at redshift below 2.2 and above 2.2 Lyman alpha forest. And we also have about 10 million Milky Way stars. So DESY is going to cover 14,000 square degrees, and we're going to obtain 35 million spectra in 5 years. So before going to the spectroscopic observations, because we cannot, I mean, as I said, we're going to observe, so to obtain 35 million spectra, but in order to select the most relevant spectra, we first have imaging data that we use to define target selection. So we are using 3 different imaging surveys for DESY. So BAS and MZLS in the northern galactic cap, and also decals in part of the northern galactic cap and in the southern galactic cap. So all the observations have been done, and we are observing in 3 bands, so G or Z. The data reduction is done also, and we are working with latest version of this imaging survey, which is DR9. And in addition to the optical band GRZ, we also have some infrared bands using the WISE satellite. So here is the footprint of the imaging survey. So BAS, which gives G and R, and MZLS, which gives the Z band, DIC and decals. And as I said, for the scientific survey, we are going to use the targets from the DR9. Just to provide some time scale, so DESY is just at its beginning. So we had the first light in October 2019. Survey validation started in March, just before the lockdown, and we started again at the end of last year. And it's about to be finished by the end of the month, at least the part of the survey validation which aims at validating the target selection, testing the spectroscopic data pipeline, putting in place some visual inspection to ensure that we can obtain truth table for the redshift and check the performance of the spectroscopic redshift assignments. And in April this year, so we are going to observe just 1% of the total footprint. So we call it the 1% survey, and it's going to be observed under the same observing conditions as for the main survey, while during survey validation, we have deeper exposure in order to test our target selection pipelines. And so we are going to have public releases of data almost every year. The main survey is going to start later in spring this year, around May, June. And we have already identified some key projects for DESY. So projects basically that are collaboration effort and that we need to provide results from them for outside the community. I will go back briefly to at least one of them, the full shape analysis. I'm the convener of this key project. And we plan to have the DESY Year 1 papers by the end of 2022. So, which means we have already starting putting in place the data analysis pipeline and testing it on MOX. Okay, so now let's just focus on the Bright Galaxy survey. So you can think about this sample as the SDSS main sample, but with 2 magnitudes deeper, but it has a lower signal to noise. It's about 5, while for SDSS main sample, it was about 25. And also as gamma, but with 50 times the area, but it's less complete in dense regions. And the goals for this sample in terms of the target selection requirements and some redshift requirements are the following. We want a completeness above 90% of the galaxies fainter than the 19.5 in the air band, and a redshift success rate which is above 95%. We want a density of targets of about of at least 700 objects per square degrees at this magnitude. footprint, as I said, 40,000 square degrees with 3 passes, which gives this 10 million bright galaxies, fainter than 19.5 in this redshift range, with a mean redshift around 0.2. And just to illustrate what I was saying about survey validation, how for BGS, for instance, we try to test the target selection pipeline. So in this diagram, you have the predicted magnitude in the airband, the fiber magnitude in the airband, and you can see in dashed the main survey. So BGS, we call BGS bright galaxies fainter than 19.5, and BGS faint up to 20 in the airband, and so this is for the main survey. And for survey validation, we have additional samples that go beyond this selection to test the boundaries. So, for instance, we have even fainter galaxies and also some cuts in this quantity to ensure redshift success. So during survey validation, we are testing the exposure time that determines the redshift success rate. And we are also testing the density, the completeness, and the redshift accuracy after assigning fibers. Regarding the survey strategy, it's not a work, this is a work led by Sheng-Woon Han, who is a co-convener of the BGS working group. Just to mention how we can determine that our sample can actually work. So Sheng simulated BGS spectra with a sky brightness that is typical of the BGS exposures. So on this figure, you can see the flux for BGS spectrum for this exposure and the source in a dotted line. And then he ran spectral simulations for different exposure times. And then you can compute the redshift success rate for these different exposure times. So this is shown in this figure, the redshift success rate as a function of the magnitude in the airband. And the question is, which exposure time ensures the requirement of a 95% redshift success at magnitude 19.5? And the answer is we need an exposure time which is about 280 seconds. Once you have this information, you can run survey simulations where basically you first need a sky model. So you need to predict the sky brightness for given observing conditions. So for instance, for the air mass, for the moon altitude, for the moon separation. In blue, you have the moon conditions for both, in green for the commissioning, and in orange for SVR1, for SV1. So the part we observed during between December 2020 and now. And the idea then is to look at the predicted sky brightness with respect to the observed sky brightness to test your model. And you can see that it's quite well described by the model. So then you can run survey simulations with this BGS sky brightness sky model, the exposure time we mentioned previously, and check whether we can indeed observe the 10 million galaxies or the 14,000 square degrees with 3 passes, which so far is the case. Okay, so it was on the survey strategy side. Now regarding the target selection pipeline, so I contributed to this work with Omar Ruiz Macias, PhD student at Durham University. We working also with Sean Cole, Peter Norberg, and Carlton Bow. So we start with the DR9 legacy imaging data, and then we built a target selection pipeline to eventually obtain a sample of bright galaxies with the required density, and a sample of fainter galaxies with also there is a requirement on this target density as well. And I just provided here the main components of this target selection. So the bright galaxy survey is a magnitude limited sample. So ideally, you just would like to have a cut in magnitude and basically remove the stars. In practice, you need to account for additional effects, but in essence, this is really the same idea. So first, of course, we have the star-galaxy separation, and I'm going to say a bit more in the next slide. You have some spatial masking, so to mask, for instance, around bright stars, because objects in the vicinity of these bright stars have compromised photometry. So although it can be a good BGS target, we're not going to measure its photometry well enough, so we remove these objects. We can have some photometric cuts. So for instance, we want to avoid objects with weird colors or with a low fiber magnitude, which would mean a low redshift success rate. And we can also have some quality cuts. So for instance, we require at least one observation in each band, GRZ. So these are quite standard to ensure a good quality, good photometric data. So this target selection has been described in more details into these two papers. So in these two papers, we used the DR8 imaging data, and we are going to publish a paper with DR9 now that I'm leading regarding the star-galaxy separation. So we based it with on a Gaia morphological criterion. So we used the Gaia DR2. And basically, we had this criterion, so G minus RR. G is the G band from the Gaia magnitude without galactic extinction correction. And RR is the raw airband magnitude from the legacy survey, also not corrected for galactic extinction. And objects, so G minus RR as a function of the color G minus Z, and objects above this line are classified as galaxies, and objects below as stars. And of course, we can do this for all objects in our legacy survey that match Gaia, but Gaia is very complete at the magnitude range of interest. And this is how we can remove stars from our sample. And eventually, Omar showed that we have less than 2% stellar contamination, which is what we want. I also looked at the target density variation with stellar density that is shown in this figure. So you have the target density divided by the mean target density as a function of the stellar density in log. For the free imaging surveys, BAS-MZLS, DCALS, AGC, DCALS, NGC, if you want no correlation between these quantities, the target density shouldn't depend on the observing conditions. It shouldn't depend on the stellar density. If there is any correlation, it means you have some systematics. So here we can see that we have about less than 10% variation with stellar density, which remains low compared to other fainter DESI targets. That's the advantage of targeting bright objects. And you can look at the cross correlation between BGS targets and the stars, and to ensure that at large scales, it gives you basically the amount of contamination. And you can see that within the error bars, we don't have significant contamination of the stars on the clustering. The second issue we found, and especially between DR8 and DR9, is about large galaxies. So in the spatial masking, I mentioned bright stars, but initially with DR8, we were also masking around large galaxies. So we kept the large galaxy itself, but we removed objects in the vicinity of these large galaxies because we found that the photometry was compromised. But there have been lots of improvements on the imaging data side. And so now we can use, so basically we can use the objects in the vicinity of these large galaxies. So here you have the large galaxies, and you have the large galaxy mask in blue. And there are objects, we found that we were missing objects with a previous selection because of this mask, which were actually true BGS targets. So now we are not masking anymore around large galaxies, and instead we can have some additional cuts some additional quality cuts to remove junk in the vicinity of these large galaxies. And a way to look at this effect is by looking at the cross-correlation function, so between large galaxies and BGS faint targets. So this is the dashed line, and between BGS bright targets and BGS faint targets, which is the solid line in both cases. And by looking at the comparison between both, it tells you whether you are missing BGS bright targets in the vicinity of the large galaxies. So if we look at the figure on the left first, where we apply the mask around large galaxies, again, the different colors are for the different imaging surveys, and in gray, same exercise, but with a mock. Let's just focus on one case for BAS-MZLS, for instance, so the blue one. The dashed line showed that there is a drop here. It decreases at about 30 arc second, which actually corresponds to the size of the large galaxy mask. So indeed, we mask all these objects. So there is a lack of a cross-correlation signal. And we can see that there is also a similar trend when looking at the BGS bright targets with the BGS faint targets, so the solid line. While if you look at just the mock, it does not show this drop. So when we don't apply the large galaxy mask, this is the same caption, we indeed don't see the decrease, and we obtain a behavior which is closer to the mock. It seems to have some increase, which at this stage can be due to junk. We know we can have some junk, but I remind that here the scales are below 30 arc second, which is very small, and so you will see that the effect on the clustering is really negligible. Okay, so in order to identify the most relevant cuts to remove junk objects around large galaxies, Omar created a visual inspection tool. So we had visual inspection of the sparse sample of BGS objects flagged by the large galaxy mask. And basically you have here, so different information. So here you have, so these are color diagram to see whether some color cuts to remove the junks, and the different colors correspond to, in blue, inconsistent classification between different inspectors. In green, you have the confirmed galaxy, and in orange, the confirmed non-galaxy. So you can see that, I mean, perhaps we could imagine a color cut, but it does not seem obvious that one color curve would be more promising. So at this stage, at the targeting level, we decided not to apply additional cuts, to be as close as possible to a magnitude limited sample. And we'll see with spectroscopic observations. We know that with spectroscopic observations, we're going to be able to remove the stars and keep the galaxies. It does not represent a huge fraction of objects per square degrees. Perhaps I think Omar showed it was about 2 objects per square degrees, so not a lot. We also looked at the validation with gamma. So gamma is another spectroscopic survey, as I said, which is very complete for the magnitude between 14 and 19 in the air bands. So we looked at the completeness with respect to gamma for matched objects for different scenarios for the target selection. In black, when we were using the previous cuts in a DR8, but applied to DR9 imaging data. In orange, when we don't apply the large galaxy mask, and you see that indeed the completeness is improved. And then the blue and the red, the difference is whether we apply or not these quality cuts that remove some junk around large galaxies. And so you can see that the completeness is more than 99% in both cases. So we decided for this paper and this exercise to take the purest sample, so the one where we apply these cuts. So then you can look at some clustering properties of your BGS targets that are selected using DR9 legacy imaging surveys. We can look at the angular clustering and the consistency of the angular clustering between the different imaging regions and with the MOCs, so which is shown in this figure. So where you have the angular clustering times the power law form. So you may know that in the HALO model, we can see the clustering as a sum of two terms. So you have a contribution from the two HALO terms. So contribution from correlation between halos, between pairs of different halos, and you have a contribution from the one halo terms. So pairs between within a halo between a central and a satellite galaxy, for instance. And the sum of these two contribution gives a power law form that that can be fitted to the angular clustering, so that we can extract the slope of the clustering, gamma, and the amplitude, which is related to the clustering strength. And so that's what I did. So you have consistent slope and clustering strength between the three imaging regions and with MXXL, which is good news. In order to check additional systematics, to do some additional tests of systematics, you can also look at the angular clustering as a function of magnitude. So for different bins in apparent magnitude, from the brightest galaxy to the faintest. And for the three regions and for MXXL, and we recover what we expect, which is brighter samples have larger clustering amplitudes. And the break from the parallel form, which basically this parallel form is valid up to 1 degree, and then it breaks down, and the break happens at smaller angles for fainter samples, which corresponds to smaller clustering strength. We have a clustering strength for the faintest galaxies, which is about 2 megaparsec over H, while for the brightest galaxies, which are also the biggest, we have a clustering strength of about 10, 12 megaparsec order H, which is related to the size of the typical size of the halo at these magnitudes. So the results match the expectations, and it also goes, we can also go to fainter magnitudes and to larger scales compared to SDSS. I haven't shown the comparison with SDSS, but in Omar's previous paper, you can find it. I also looked at the angular clustering as a function of color. So for separate apparent magnitude bins, so a brighter and a fainter galaxy sample, we can look at we can divide the sample into 50% blue galaxies on one hand and 50% red galaxies on the other hand, because we know that galaxies with red colors trace an old stellar populations, while galaxies with intermediate masses are bluer and younger with higher stellar formation rates. So as expected, here we can see that, so you have inserted the results for the targets and dotted for MXXL, the mock, the simulation that mimics the BGS properties. And as expected, we find that brighter and redder galaxies are more strongly clustered. And we also you can also try to tune the fractions of blue and red galaxies, which in the mock, to reproduce even better the data, but also to constrain stellar formation rates and galaxy formation models. Another statistic I looked at, but I'm not showing here, which is related to the angular properties with higher order statistics using Cansin cell. So you can look at the mean density. You can look also at the variance, skewness, and kurtosis. So higher order statistics that also probe the angular properties, but at different scales, and especially at smaller scales, and compare this with the mock, so that the mock can also mimic higher order statistics and not only 2-point statistics. And eventually, for this project, I looked also at cross-correlation with external spectroscopic data sets. So here I used the SDSS MGS DR7 and the BOSS CMAS LOSI CMAS galaxies from SDSS, and by computing the cross-correlation between the BGS targets and redshift slices of the external spectroscopic catalogs, you can have information about the evolution of the clustering as a function of redshift. And you can use the cross-correlation signal. The amplitude of the cross-correlation signal is proportional to the redshift distribution of the BGS targets. So that's what I did here. This method is called clustering redshift. And so in color, you have the different results for the cross-correlations. So this one, for instance, cross-correlating SDSS MGS galaxies and BGS targets in BAS MZLS region. And you can reconstruct the redshift distribution of the BGS targets, and I compared it with the redshift distribution from the BGS targets that were matched with gamma. At this stage, of course, we don't want to do to obtain a competitive measurement. It's just informative. As I said, it's testing the properties of the BGS targets, and the BGS sample is not the most suitable sample for clustering redshift. It works better at higher redshift and with even denser photometric samples, and denser and deeper photometric samples. But yeah, within the error bars, it reproduces the expected redshift distribution, and the measurements are consistent between the 3 imaging regions. Okay, so now once we have this this cosmological this sample of BGS galaxies, we can do some cosmological analysis using 2-point statistics. And as and these 2-point statistics analysis are part of what we call the KEEP project, as I mentioned. So basically, when we say 2-point statistics, we mean correlation function and power spectrum. Here I'm showing the correlation function, actually 2D histograms of the amplitude of the correlation function for pairs parallel to the line of sight and perpendicular to the line of sight using both DR11 galaxies. And just to show the two signatures, cosmological signatures we are using to extract information about the expansion of the universe and about the structure growth, the growth rate of structures. So first, you can see here the Baryan acoustic oscillation, this characteristic scale at 100 megaparsec order H between galaxies that can be used as a standard ruler to measure basically position parallel and perpendicular to the line of sight that are related to cosmological parameter, the Hubble expansion rate and the angular diameter distance. And we can also see at intermediate scales around here 50 megaparsec order H, anisotropic clustering, like a squashing effect, which is due to redshift space distortion. So the fact that when we measure the distance of a galaxy along the line of sight, we have a component from the Hubble flow, the displacement, but we also have the line of sight component of the peculiar velocity of each galaxies, which leads to these anisotropies in the galaxy clustering. What we do, we decompose this 2D correlation function into Legendre multipoles, just because it's easier to extract information. And actually, we can, from the monopole, so L equals 0, we can extract the BAO peak at 100 megaparsec order H, a position of this BAO peak in the 3 direction. And we can extract from the quadrupole, the non-zero quadrupole, the amplitude of the quadrupole is proportional to the growth rate of structures. And as I said, this quadrupole is due to the anisotropies in the correlation function due to peculiar velocities. So this is what we call the two-point statistics analysis. These analyses with the correlation function and power spectrum are now standard analysis, key project analysis. And so we did this, as I said, with SDSS, so with about 2 million spectra, sorry for the typo. And with DESY, we're going to have 35 million. And we can measure the expansion history. So we can, with the shift of the BO peak parallel to the line of sight, we can measure the Hubble expansion rate, assuming a cosmological model. And with the perpendicular shift to the line of sight, we can measure the angular diameter distance, assuming a cosmological model. So here you can see the results from these two measurements for the angular diameter distance and the Hubble distance as a function of redshift for the different tracers. And you can also see the results for the growth rate, which is proportional, which basically has a prediction from general relativity with a lambda CDM model. And you can see the measurements from SDSS. With DESY, these are the forecasts with 5 years of data taking for the Hubble expansion rate and for the growth rate of structures as a function of redshift for the five here, different tracers, BGS, luminous red galaxies, ELGs, quasars for clustering analysis, and Lyman alpha for rest. And so, as I said, I'm more interested in the low redshift universe where dark energy prevails. We are going to obtain sub% measurement of cosmic distances and a few % measurements of structure growth. But for the BGS, we are not dominated by statistics. We are dominated by cosmic variance, the fact that we observe only one universe. And so we can test this with a method called multitracer that I'm going to present just after. But in general, to perform this clustering analysis, we need to test a lot of systematics, modeling systematics, observational systematics. And to do so, we first need to produce simulated data sets that mimic the statistical properties, the clustering properties of each tracer. That this is what we call mock. So I'm involved in the mock production for BGS. So here, the method we are working with to produce new mocks for BGS is based on a method that Alex Smith, a postdoc at Saclay, developed during his PhD at Durham. So he produced this MXXL mock I mentioned, and I used to compare BGS target properties with properties from the MXXL mock, which is based on an HOD, which is a standard recipe to populate halos with galaxies. But compared to other mock for LRG, ELGs, here we need magnitude and color information in the mocks. So we assign magnitude using luminosity function from SDSS at redshift below 0.1 and gamma at redshift 0.2. Here you can see the luminosity, the function for different redshift range from the data and the interpolation from the model. So it's in very good agreement. And then you assign colors based on luminosity, redshift, whether you have a central or a satellite galaxies using color magnitude diagram from SDSS. And in this paper, here you have a reference if you want more details. He also checked the clustering properties. Here, for instance, he compared the multipoles, so monopole, here actually the monopole with BOSS data. So we are using a similar procedure to produce more mocks. So for MXXL, it was only one mock, one light cone. Here now we want to have much more MOX. So we are using another kind of simulation, Abaqus Summit simulations. And the idea is the same. First, to produce a target luminosity function. So here you can see the number of galaxies as a function of halo mass. And the colors, it goes to increasing brightness this way. So first you have your target luminosity function, then you populate your, you assign luminosity to your galaxies, and you apply it to the Abaqus Summit MOX to create a MOX, and you can compare with the MXXL clustering to see whether you find an agreement between both. So currently, there are Alex and also Cameron, a PhD student at Durham, are working on modifying the fitting pipeline to have robust HOD parameters before producing the MOX. And we're also going to investigate the cosmology dependency, because the nice thing with these Abaqus Summit MOX is that we have, so not only we have for a given cosmology, we have at least 3 MOX of different resolutions, but we also have lots of different MOX with different cosmological parameters, so that we can test the cosmology dependency of our measurements and ensure that we are not sensitive to the cosmological model we assume to do the analysis and to extract distances and growth rate. Okay, so a project that I've proposed to the collaboration and that I'm leading with my student Sviatoslav, who just started an internship and then a PhD, is to use what we call the multi-tracer method in order to get rid of the cosmic variance. So basically, here this is an illustration of this technique using the BGS MXXL MOC, where instead of just considering one dense population, the full BGS sample, we split the sample by colors. So we have blue galaxies on one hand, red galaxies on the other hand. These 2 samples are still still dense enough. So each subsample is limited by cosmic variance. But as I showed previously, blue and red galaxies have different clustering properties with respect to the matter density field, and in this case, different bias. So that's why here on this plot that shows the monopole of the power spectrum, you have different amplitude that corresponds to different bias, red galaxies, blue galaxies, and the cross power spectrum. Here you have the same for the quadrupole. And by doing the joint analysis, so by considering the cross terms instead of just the individual analysis, we can improve the constraints on the growth rate by at most 20% with respect to a single tracer analysis. And so the idea of the first part of this PhD is to develop the pipeline for this analysis, which requires some improvements. What is the optimal splitting between blue and red galaxies that maximize the gain? We also need to think about covariance metrics, because we need to include cross terms. And of course, we also need the MOX to test the pipeline. Okay, so I'm also interested in the small scale clustering. So I said that standard clustering analysis using a monopole, quadrupole, and hexadecapole, they use a scale that starts at around 20, 30 megaparsec over H in configuration space, so scales above that. So we call these intermediate scales to extract cosmological information. But we don't use information from smaller scales, and the issue is that the model we are using to predict the 2-point clustering breaks down at scales below, because it's based on a perturbative approach. And we know, especially when we can have shell crossing, for instance, we don't we don't have only one fluid, but we can have several fluids. That perturbative approach breaks down at these small scales, and so we have to develop the models so that we can extract reliable information from these small scales. So that's why I decided to, during my postdoc, and I'm still doing it, to co-supervise a PhD on this that Carolina Cuesta Lazaro is working on. So, and we published the analysis in this paper, where basically, so in correlation function, the way we model the correlation function in redshift space, it's easy to obtain a prediction of the correlation function in real space. And then we need to add the effect of the peculiar velocities. And usually we use a Gaussian model to describe the peculiar velocities, and in particular to describe the pairwise infold velocities. So this pairwise infold velocity that corresponds to, it's represented here. So it's a relative velocity projected on the line between the two pairs, between the two objects. And this pairwise infold velocity, when you look at its behavior in simulations, it's not Gaussian at all, and it's not Gaussian at small scales, but it's also not Gaussian at large scales. But in the model, we assume a Gaussian model. So just that we can, so just by using a mean infold velocity and a dispersion. But we showed that actually it could be better reproduced by a skew-T model that includes skewness and kurtosis. So this is represented here by the model in red, with when we add skewness and kurtosis compared to the Gaussian case in blue, and in black you have the measurements from the n-body simulations. So the strange thing, let's say, is that although it gives a very poor fit to the pairwise velocity PDF, the Gaussian case, it reproduces the multiples within 1 sigma for scales above 30 megaparsec order h. So that's why we could use it for standard analysis, and we are going to test it for DESY analysis to see whether it's accurate enough for the DESY statistical precision. But if you want to go to smaller scales, with the skew-T model, you can obtain correct and accurate predictions done to scales about 10 megaparsec order h. So we showed that we can extend the validity of the model to smaller scales. The next step to be able to extract cosmological information is to find a way to obtain the cosmological dependency of the skewness and kurtosis, because we can have an analytical prediction that depends on the cosmological parameters for the mean infold velocity and for the dispersion velocity, but we don't know for skewness and kurtosis, and so the idea here is to use emulators, so using a set of simulations on different cosmological models, and basically to infer the cosmological dependency and model it with an emulator. And that's something that is under development with Carolina and her supervisor, Beiju Li and Carlton Bo, and also with Alex Egmeyer, a postdoc at Durham. And we are using some simulations. And my second project for DESY year 1 that I'm going to work on and to lead is to develop this emulator for the DESY BGS and to test its performance on the DESY BGS, which is, as I said already, a dense sample, so where basically the requirements in terms of modeling accuracy are more important than samples at a higher redshift and which are sparser. Okay, and so of course, as I said at the beginning, the idea of both exploring the large-scale redshift space distortion with standard analysis and with multi-tracer analysis, and also with small-scale clustering analysis, is to test gravity. Here, I'm just showing an illustration that I made for my PhD, where you have the growth rate of the measurements of the growth rate of structure as a function of redshift. And this is the measurement I did during my PhD with quasars, the first sample of quasars with eBOS. And what I want to show in this plot is it's more the theoretical prediction. So you have the predictions with a lambda CDM model with a general relativity, assuming the Planck cosmology in solid black. And here you have some scalar tensor theories that are still allowed by the joint detection of the gravitational waves and an electromagnetic counterpart. And so here you may know, for instance, the FOFR model, which is the simplest extension to one of the simplest extension to general relativity. And we can also see some other scalar tensor parametrizations. And you can see their predictions for the growth, this growth rate of structures. And of course, here you realize also that what is really important with DESY is that within each tracer we have the best measurements, but also that we have all the different tracers that probe a wide redshift range, so that we can combine all them together and probe the structure growth at low redshift, but also at high redshift, even if dark energy is not dominated in this redshift range. And with small-scale clustering analysis, we in this paper we showed some estimators that we could use with DESY to test the theory of gravity, which includes the small-scale clustering I mentioned and the use of emulators, for instance, to extract information from this regime. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we should wrap up reasonably soon.
Yeah, perfect. So this is my, two last slide, and this one will be quicker. Okay, thanks. And the last two slides are more openings that we can do with BGS. So we with BGS with DESY, we had the opportunity to propose secondary to have secondary target proposal that will be observed during survey validation and hopefully during SVR1 as well. And I'm involved in one of these proposals that aims at measuring the peculiar velocity information directly for the BGS galaxies, because we showed, and Cullen Ollett is a postdoc at Queensland is leading this effort, that we can obtain an improvement on the growth rate at small redshift, so at a low redshift below 0.1, where we are really dominated by cosmic variance and we are not very constraining, but by adding information from the peculiar velocities, we can have improvements on the growth rate of structures. And we can also probe the scale dependence of the growth rate. And actually in GR, we assume the growth rate is scale independent, but in most of the modified gravity models, including the scalar tensor theories I showed previously, we expect a scale dependent growth rate. So if we see any scale dependency, it would rule out general relativity. And eventually, the link with that's I would say the opening I had by doing my postdoc at ICC, but which has a strong connection also with galaxy formation models and a strong expertise in galaxy formation simulations. So I'm working with Sam Moore, a PhD student at Durham, to measure the galaxy luminosity function, which is a key tool to understand galaxy formation. And here you can see that, so here this is the measurement of the galaxy of luminosity function as a function of absolute magnitude for different local tidal environments. So the galaxy luminosity function in voids, in sheets, in filaments, in knots. And you can see that the effect on the luminosity function is not the same, so it can be used to constrain galaxy formation models. And I will stop here and let my summary slide.
Okay, thank you. Let's everyone unmute. Right, questions for Pauline? Raise your hands or just shout them out as normal. I think I know slightly too much about this to ask questions.
I hope so.
Just a naive question. Do you have a sense of what the physical density is going to be of things you're getting spectra for? I mean, is it 1 per 100 cubic megaparsecs, or what's the kind of...
Okay, so basically the number of galaxies per...
divided by the effective volume.
Yeah. So usually, yes, so for this bright galaxy survey, we have the number density, which is about 10 to the minus 4.5 h megaparsec over h inverse megaparsec over h cube. And just to give you an idea, for both galaxies, it were more about 10 to the minus, 10 to the minus 2 for BGS. It was about 10 to the minus 3 for both. And for quasars, because it's a sparse sample, it's about 10 to the minus 5.
Okay, okay.
Alex, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question about the star-galaxy separations. So I've also heard of people using the Gaia astrometric excess noise to do star-galaxy separation. So basically using, essentially using Gaia's photometry to separate stars and galaxies. So why did you, or sort of what's the reason for choosing the color-based selection rather than the astrometric excess noise?
So we first started with this, we first started with PSF spectral type only. And we found that it was, by comparing with gamma, it was not enough. We had objects that were classified, and even the comparison with Gaia, objects that were classified as stars, as galaxies by Tractor, the DESI pipeline, but which are actually galaxies according to Gaia and Gamma. And then we went to this Gaia astrometric noise, but Omar did the comparison and he found that the morphological criterion that I presented using Gaia was better to remove the stars, and it leads to smaller stellar contamination. And I think based on that, we updated the Gaia astrometric noise between, I don't remember which versions, but at least between DR7 and DR8, we updated that. So yeah, so and so then we decided to continue with the same criterion. So we haven't done the check with DR8, with DR9, sorry.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, well, let's thank Pauline again. Thank you. We can get back to DESI telecoms now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.